Hello, BookTube. As part of our little two-person book club, Matthew at Mayberry Book Club and I are reading this book in the month of May, 7 Days in May, by Fletcher Knebel and the Boston journalist Charles Bailey. This is a 1962 novel of a potential military threat to overtake the United States government, to enact a coup. It was well received when it came out, and also raucously resisted by very vocal pockets of the upper echelons of the U.S. military for obvious reasons, because the story revolves around, at the beginning anyway, a power differential. There's never explicitly stated as that, but it's pretty clear in the course of the book. President Jordan Lyman has the lowest approval ratings of any president in Gallup poll history when this book opens. There's inflation, there's a strike going on, and the public isn't 100% sold on a recent nuclear disarmament treaty that he conducted with his counterpart in the Soviet Union. Whereas, on the other side of the equation, General James Mattoon Scott, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the most powerful military figure in the country, is also extremely popular with the people and has been an outspoken critic of that treaty. Thinks that it's a drastic mistake, even a betrayal of the United States. And as this book opens, General Scott's basically his chief of staff, the guy who sort of runs the staffing for the Joint Chiefs, a man named Colonel Casey, a lifetime, a dedicated serving Marine, certainly not a radical of any kind, one way or another, someone who in fact likes to keep politics completely out of his professional job when he's in uniform especially. He starts to notice one or two little things that just don't seem right. General Scott has a betting pool for the Preakness that happens to coincide with the day of a super secret all-branch U.S. military drill designed to simulate the U.S. military's all-branch response to an all-out attack from the Soviet Union. So all forces go on alert, troops go out to major cities all over the country, a massive communications device to cut in on the networks will be tested, and the president himself will be whisked to a secure location and kept there until the drill is over. It's an odd time to be having a betting pool, and something about the wording just doesn't strike Colonel Casey right at all. On top of which, an old friend of his tells him about a secret military base, Site Y, outside of El Paso, that Colonel Casey's never heard of. He doesn't let on that he's never heard of it, but he's never heard of it, and he absolutely should have heard of it. He has the highest military clearance that you can have. There shouldn't be a secret military base that he knows nothing about. And also, there's an acronym floating around, ECOMCON. And again, Colonel Casey has never heard of this before. His friend assumes that he has, and he doesn't let on, but it worries him enough to take the whole mess of these wrong notes straight to the top. He happens to know Paul Girard, who is a close personal political ally of President Jordan. President Jordan has two close political allies, Georgia Senator Clark, and Paul Girard, who works in the White House. Casey badgers Girard into letting him talk to President Lyman. And he lays out the case that he thinks the unthinkable. In fact, it's so unthinkable that President Lyman has to prod him to say it out loud. He thinks that under the direction of General Scott, the military is planning to take over the government under the guise of this military drill on Saturday, 7 days away. Casey doesn't have much in the way of actual proof, but President Lyman decides very wisely that it would be foolish not to take this seriously. That, in fact, he should act as if it's real. Until he's proven false, he should act as if it's real. And he doesn't know precisely who to trust, and he can't afford the time to recruit a large body of operatives. The last thing he wants to do is tip his hand to General Scott, who at present doesn't know that his own right-hand man has betrayed him. So the president assembles a small group of people that not only can he trust completely, but that will be effective. Of course, the foremost of those is his longtime secretary, who's right outside the door and doesn't get the credit that she deserves in this book. She pulls double shifts. She sleeps in the doctor's office in the White House, never goes home, puts her whole life on hold, and is vital for getting information to and from the president. There's her. There's, of course, Senator Clark, and also Paul Girard. There's Colonel Casey. There's also the head of the president's Secret Service detail. It would be almost impossible to keep him out of the loop anyway, but it turns out he's a solid, trustworthy guy. And also the president's budget secretary, a man named Todd, who is loves a conspiracy theory, and is also completely trustworthy, full of discretion, but who also has a very sharp courtroom-trained mind. And will be really good. He's always with a yellow legal pad, summing up the things that they're learning and sorting out the trash from the solid stuff. He's going to be very important for keeping a nice cold eye on things. That group decides that since they have very little time, they should act. And a multi-pronged approach is taken. Word has come to the president through his secretary that General Scott has a mistress in New York. Chris Todd and a lot of the other men in that room don't really see what that has to do with anything, but if it's going to come down to a showdown between the president and General Scott, and if the president is going to have to ask for Scott's resignation, it might be nice to have a club over his head. So that has to be investigated, and Colonel Casey goes to investigate that. Someone has to keep tabs on General Scott physically. Someone has to watch him as he moves around in the days leading up to this military drill. And that is the chief of the Secret Service, who knows how to tail people, has all of the clandestine operations down pat. He will be the one to keep General Scott in view. Chris Todd will stay at the White House with his yellow legal pads to keep an extra brain focused on things. Paul Girard has a field mission, and so does Senator Clark. One of the people in General Scott's Preakness in his betting pool for Saturday declined. Sinpak, the chief of the fleet in the Pacific, declined to be part. Said, "No bet from me." That seems very odd, and seems like that admiral is probably a person to talk to, since he's declining to be part of what Colonel Casey believes is a coup. Paul Girard's task is to go out to the Pacific and talk to that admiral. Get the whole plan in writing with his signature on every page. Otherwise, Scott is far more popular in the polls than President Lyman. Confronting him without actual documentary proof feels pretty grim. So Paul Girard is sent out to the Pacific to talk to that admiral and get the whole thing in writing. And Senator Clark is sent to do the one other piece of legwork that is absolutely necessary here. Someone has to go and see this Site Y outside of El Paso. As Chris Todd points out, we don't even know that it really exists. How on earth could you keep an entire military base secret from people who are on the Defense Committee? How on earth is that possible? It surely isn't possible. Someone has to go out there and look at it. And Senator Clark gets that job and heads out to El Paso. And the action in the first part, the first chunk of this book that we read, was confined to the White House, largely confined to the White House, where President Lyman starts to deal with the situation, starts to gather information, starts to get the input of the people around him. The next section that we looked at is when Fletcher Neville and Charles Bailey decide to jazz up the plot. And the way that you do that in 1962 or in 2022 is with MacGuffins. There's no way around it. Otherwise, every novel would be a short story. So we get a long description of, for instance, the Secret Service agent tailing General Scott. It's described in great detail. It is interesting. I'm not deriding these things, and it does yield at least one detail for the plot. which is that through that agent's surveillance of General Scott, we learn that General Scott's inner circle is not very big. The head of the military base where the president is scheduled to be whisked during this drill doesn't know. He's not part of the plan. He doesn't know what's going on. That's something that the Secret Service agent learns in the course of his observing General Scott. He also learns that General Scott is deeply in cahoots with a radical right-wing demagogue on the networks, someone who is trying to command an hour of TV without network supervision for Saturday. So nothing has been left to chance here. Nationwide communications, brigades of men at key cities, and one of the most influential right-wing pontificators, fully on board with the message and willing to speak it to the people without anyone being able to stop him. The military will be in charge of communications, so no one will be able to shut it down, and the president will be incommunicado. The Secret Service agent learns that. And Paul Gerard goes out to the admiral, the one recusant admiral, and when he calls President Lyman later, his mood is, I guess you could say, celebratory. It's a pretty grim way to celebrate, but it's all true. That's what he learns from that admiral in the Pacific. It's all true. Everything that Colonel Casey thought is true. The admiral wrote it all out. He admitted to it. He signed and dated every page, and Paul Gerard has those pages and is on his way back to the White House. President Lyman is in an unenviable position. No U.S. president has ever been in this position before, but that picks up his spirits because he has written proof now. He has something to confront General Scott with. It's only relatively immediately later in the plot that he learns that Paul Gerard is dead. The plane he was on crashed into a mountain. Everyone died. Not only is President Lyman devastated by that personally, because he and Senator Clark are Lyman's only friends in Washington, but he's also devastated for it for practical reasons, because without that proof, it's his word against General Scott and a bunch of inferences by someone on Scott's own staff. He feels like all is lost when that word comes through. That leaves one MacGuffin still in the air, and that's what we get a bulk of today in today's reading, and that is Senator Clark. A very, very likable figure, one of the most human figures in the book, and flawed, a weakness for alcohol, but a great storyteller and a great convincer. Not at all the prickly proto-autocrat that, for instance, the Treasury Secretary is. Not at all the blinkered loyalist that, for instance, the Secret Service agent is, but rather a realist and someone to whom President Lyman owes debt that no one can ever repay. A debt that the book goes into in great detail and that we'll talk about next week. Senator Clark goes out to El Paso. He drinks on the way there and feels bad about that. He knows it makes him less reliable, and the president is relying on him. He doesn't drink once he gets there. Instead, he starts to ask around. He intentionally conceals his identity as a U.S. senator and starts to ask around people in El Paso. I've heard tell about a military base near here, and they start to list off the military base, and he says, no, this one's new. It's near here, and it's new. I've heard all about it. I want to go to visit. Most of them don't know anything. Eventually, he gets a tip from a gas station owner, pretending to be a salesman. And eventually, acting on that tip and being very careful, he finds the base. It's an unmarked road in the middle of the desert, but he finds it and is immediately accosted by armed sentries who don't care who he is. They take control of his car and drive him into Site Y, put him in a Quonset hut that's locked from the outside. They treat him with a bare minimum of courtesy, but even once they learn who he is, he's still locked in that hut. They don't let him go. Once the jig is up and he starts to talk to these people, he tells them that he's a U.S. senator, and not only a U.S. senator, but that he's on the Armed Services Committee. So in every sense of the word, he's a gigantic heavyweight who should be treated with unbelievable deference by military men. Instead, they don't let him have a phone. They lock him into the room. And in a horrible twist, a twist based on information provided about Senator Clark by Senator Prentice, who is in on the plot. In a horrible twist, when Senator Clark wakes up from a nap, he sees a bottle of his favorite liquor just inside the locked door. Again, the information from the turncoat senator is this is a guy who has a weakness for drink. Supply him with drink. That's what you ought to do. Clark is quietly infuriated by that and pours the liquor down the toilet. Both bottles that he gets, he pours down the toilet. But he can't do anything. Can't go anywhere. He's pacing. And he knows the whole time this is happening, the president is missing him. As we know, that is true. The president wonders where on earth he is. Eventually, because there's such a minimal control structure, eventually, the person who is in temporary command of Site Y outside of El Paso is Colonel Casey's old friend who told him about Site Y to begin with, who has no idea. He is not part of General Scott's inner circle. Very few people are. He has no idea what's going on. No idea who authorized this site. No idea what it's for. Knows that it's going to be involved in the training exercise on Saturday, but doesn't know anything more than that. When he enters what is effectively Senator Clark's prison cell, Clark knows that he has an uphill battle. This is a trained and loyal soldier, loyal to the chain of command. Clark has to completely disrupt that. He has to convince this friend of Colonel Casey's what's going on and how imperative it is that while he's in charge of the base, he gets Senator Clark the hell out of there. Get him out of there. Allow him to get back to Washington, or the whole world is going to change for the worse. That essentially this guy, Mutt Henderson, owes it to his country to disobey his commanding officer. And eventually, it works. Eventually, the two of them get in a Jeep and make their way out of Site Y. They are challenged at the gate, at one of the perimeters, by a guard who was told by General Scott's second-in-command that under no circumstances was the civilian to leave Site Y at all, with anyone, for any reason. Which maybe doesn't strike a 2022 audience with the enormity that it might have struck a 1962 audience. I was thinking about that when I was rereading these pages. One of the problems with the outrage that readers at the time would have been feeling about what was done to Senator Clark. He wasn't beaten or sweated or anything, but he was kept incommunicado against his will. And orders were given by a member of the military in full knowledge of the fact that the civilian was a ranking senator in the U.S. government. In 1962, Americans were familiar with plenty of corrupt senators, plenty of evil senators, plenty of self-dealing senators, plenty of leathery old monsters who just viewed the Senate as their own private gentleman's club. Americans were well familiar with that, but even those monsters in the middle of the 20th century put a lot of stock in the dignity of the impersonal office. And so the section that we're reading today is going to be harder for a 21st century reader to understand, to appreciate, to really get the full gut, visceral effect of. Because in the 21st century, our senators are not only, some of them, corrupt and self-dealing, but they are comical buffoons. They have completely, in 2022, there is virtually nothing left of what I was talking about, the sanctity of the office. That is virtually gone, and gone beyond recall. So that if you were to write some modern version of this book, you could not summon it back at all. The poster child for what I'm talking about is Texas Senator Ted Cruz, who during the presidential campaign in 2015-2016, candidate Donald Trump implicated Cruz's father in the assassination of John F. Kennedy and publicly called Cruz's wife ugly. And for a minute, when it sounded good to him to do, Cruz thundered from a speaking event that when you involve a man's family, you've crossed the line. And a week later, he was kissing Trump's boot and working the phone banks to get Trump elected president. Humiliated the whole way. A sitting U.S. senator from Texas, caught on camera trying to flee his state during a freak cold snap that was killing his constituents. He's trying to go to Cancun. And when caught doing that, as of course he was going to be caught doing that, cartoonishly ineptly lying about it. Just with cartoonish inept lies. You think of Ted Cruz, you might be outraged, especially if you're a Texan. But he's a comic figure. He is the poster child for why this particular section of 7 Days in May won't carry anymore the full dramatic effect that it had 50 years ago, 60 years ago, whenever. Because at the time when this book came out, readers would have known how serious this was by the fact that this was done to a U.S. senator. I guess we're just going to have to live with that. That's all. You're just going to have to imagine it. That's all. Let's just say Sam Rayburn would not have recognized the creature that Ted Cruz is, or any of the other cartoon figures that come to your mind in the 21st century. We just have to put up with that. Maybe that's a good thing. Ultimately, maybe that's a good thing. A lot of evil was done under the cloak of that dignity of office. Either way, it succeeds. There's a bit of action. The only bit of action anywhere in this novel happens in this section, because Mott Henderson has to disable a guard to get them off the base. The guard who says the civilian is not supposed to leave under any circumstances isn't going to sit still for Senator Clark to give him the same spiel that he gave Mott Henderson. So he just has to be incapacitated. They make it out. They make it to a plane. They make it back to Washington. At which point, of course, the president is incredibly relieved that Senator Clark is back. But while Senator Clark was gone and totally incommunicado, Paul Girard died. And when Senator Clark learns that, he too thinks that all is lost. That the biggest club that the good guys now have against General Scott is that mistress in New York, which did pan out to be, it was real, it did turn out to be something, and there are ridiculous IRS, there's a paper trail, in other words. So it could be used against General Scott. The president doesn't want to do that. It's Scott's own business. It has nothing to do with a plot to overthrow the country. But just as the parts that we're reading today come to a close, two things happen. A bunch of things are happening at this point, but two important things happen. One is that Mott Henderson is abducted from Senator Clark's townhouse in Washington. When Senator Clark goes back to the White House to reconvene with his colleagues, people break into his house where he was storing Mott Henderson and kidnap him. And the second thing that happens is that a minor attaché insists on seeing the president, gets through to him, and hands him the slightly burned but still completely legible documents that Paul Girard had on him when he died. So Paul Girard died, and the president has lost one of his two closest friends, but there is now that written record. It did survive. And somehow, by some circuitous route, the right person saw it at the right time and came all the way back to the United States from the Pacific, and insisted on seeing the president and actually got through. Suddenly, Lyman has in his hands a written, testifiable document to the plot that is going on, that is still in full swing for Saturday. So you've got those two things to end things. One is that Mott Henderson has been taken out of Senator Clark's office, Senator Clark's house, and the fact that Mott Henderson and Senator Clark made it off the base has certainly been conveyed to General Scott and his colleagues by now. So the plot is known. The plotters know that the president knows, which ups the ante and immediately starts to get them moving their plans up ahead of Saturday. Maybe let's mobilize before Saturday, since our enemy knows what we're doing. That's one thing, and the other thing that closes out this section is that there's proof now in the president's hands. So things are at a pitch. And the one big thing that's coming, the thing that we'll get to next week, is the thing that President Lyman alone, of all the people that are with him in fighting this plot, he alone has known from the very beginning what was going to happen at the end of this story, one way or another. No matter what happened, no matter what kind of proof or lack thereof, he's known from the beginning in the end, it'll be me and the general. These other people around me, they're good men and women. But in the end, it'll be just him and me alone. And that's what we're coming to in this section next week. We will finish up 7 Days in May next week. We'll talk a little about how the book ends. I'll give a few thoughts of mine, critical. I can't just talk about this book without reviewing it. At least in some sense, I can't do that. So we'll talk a little about the book, about things that it does and doesn't do, and we'll also work in a little talk about the movie. There was a famous Frankenheimer movie about this, made of this book, that people really liked. It was as popular as the book for a little while, and is, as is so often the case, crucially different from the book in a few ways. So we'll talk about all that next week when we wrap up this read-along. So until then, I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.